Josie Hart had exactly 4 minutes to save her son's life, and she was going to do it with a coffee pot. The diner was on fire. Not metaphorically, actually on fire, black smoke curling along the ceiling tiles, the fryer in the back popping and hissing like something alive and angry. And somewhere behind that wall of smoke, in the storage room where he wasn't supposed to be, but always was because after-school care cost money she didn't have, her 7-year-old son Eli was trapped behind a door that had swollen shut in the heat. She could hear him. That was the worst part. She could hear him coughing and calling her name, and every single person in that diner was running for the front door except her, because she was his mother, and mothers didn't run the other way. She grabbed the fire extinguisher bolted under the counter, the one the health inspector made them keep, and the one nobody had ever actually used, and she was fighting with the pin when a man's hand closed over hers, steady and sure, and pulled it free in one motion. "Which door?" he said. Not a question, really. A command wrapped in calm. "Storage. My son's in there." He didn't ask if she was sure, didn't waste a second doubting her, just turned toward the smoke like a man walking into weather he'd walked into 100 times before. She would think about that later. How he moved. Low, fast, controlled. One arm up over his mouth, the extinguisher held like it weighed nothing. He was a regular. Booth 6, corner by the window, every Tuesday and Thursday for the last 3 months. Black coffee, 2 eggs over easy, wheat toast, always paid cash, always left a tip that made her uncomfortable because it was too much, and he never once let her thank him properly for it. She didn't know his last name. She'd never asked. In 4 minutes, he was going to become the only man who'd ever run in a fire for her son, and she still wouldn't know his last name. And that ignorance was about to become the most expensive mistake of her life. Before we go any further, I need you to do 3 things for me. Hit subscribe so you don't lose this story halfway through, because trust me, you're going to need to see how this ends. Drop a comment right now. 1 word is fine. Just tell me you're watching. And share this with somebody who still believes in love that shows up when it counts. Okay, let's go back in. Josie is standing at the mouth of that smoke, and a man from booth 6 just disappeared into it. The door gave way on his 3rd kick. He came out 30 seconds later with Eli wrapped against his chest, the boy's small arms locked around his neck, both of them coughing, but both of them breathing, and Josie's knees actually buckled when she saw them, actually gave out beneath her, and the man caught her elbow before she hit the floor the same easy way he'd taken the extinguisher from her hand, like catching people was just something he did without thinking about it. The fire marshal later said the whole building could have gone up in 6 more minutes. The Sunday special griddle line had an old gas connection nobody flagged in the last inspection, and once that caught, there would have been nothing left to save. 6 minutes. That was the distance between Josie Hart's entire life and losing everything in it. She never got the man's name that day, not really. He gave the paramedics a first name, Grant, and then he was gone before she could catch her breath enough to ask for more. Gone before the local news truck showed up. Gone before anyone thought to ask who the stranger in the gray jacket was who'd walked into a burning diner for a woman he barely knew. 3 days later, the diner reopened with scorch marks still staining the ceiling above the kitchen doorway, because Ruby, who owned the place, couldn't afford to close longer than that and still make rent. And on the first Tuesday back at 11 in the morning, Grant walked in like nothing had happened, sat down at booth 6, and ordered black coffee and 2 eggs over easy. Josie stood behind the counter staring at him like he was a ghost that owed her money. "You're back," she finally said. "I like this place." He said it simply, the way people say true things they've never bothered to examine too hard. "Also, I never got my toast last time. Kind of a big deal, walking out of fire without my toast." She laughed before she meant to, a real laugh, the kind that surprised her because she hadn't laughed like that in longer than she wanted to admit. "I'll comp you the toast for the rest of your natural life." That's a generous offer from a woman working a job that pays her $9 an hour. She stiffened a little. Not because it was rude, it wasn't not the way he said it, but because it was true, and true things said out loud by strangers had a way of landing heavier than they should. "How do you know what I make?" "Lucky guess." He smiled, and there was something behind the smile she couldn't read yet, something careful, like a man choosing his words around a hole in the floor he didn't want her to fall into. "Also your name tag." "Josie. It's a nice name. It's my grandmother's name." She sounds like she had good taste. That was how it started. Not with fireworks. With eggs over easy and small conversations that got a little longer every week. With a man who tipped too much and asked too many gentle questions and never once talked about himself. And a woman who was too tired and too proud and too scared to notice she was falling until she already had. Here is the thing you need to understand about Josie Hart, because it matters for everything that comes after. She had not always been a waitress working double shifts in a diner off Route 9. 6 years ago, she had been an accounts manager at Whitfield Logistics, a rising star in a company built by a man named Nathaniel Whitfield, the kind of employee who got handwritten notes from executives thanking her for catching errors before they became disasters. She had a nursery painted yellow because they didn't know yet if Eli would be a boy or a girl. She had a husband, Daniel, who drove long-haul routes for the same company and always called her from the road every single night, no matter how far away he was. And then one October night, Daniel's truck went off an icy overpass outside of Denver, and the life Josie thought she was building went off the overpass with him. The company sent flowers. The company sent a card signed by people whose signatures she didn't recognize. And 4 months later, in the middle of the worst grief of her life, while she was 6 weeks from giving birth to a son his father would never meet, the company restructured her department and let her go, along with 200 other employees, in an email that arrived at 4:58 p.m. on a Friday. Severance was 2 weeks' pay. Her health insurance ended the following Monday. She never got angry about it the way she probably should have. She was too busy surviving. Grief has a way of eating anger before it can even finish forming, replacing it with the much duller, much heavier work of simply getting through the next hour. She sold the house before the bank could take it. She moved into a one-bedroom apartment above a laundromat. She learned to carry 6 plates at once and smile through double shifts and stretch a paycheck further than a paycheck was built to stretch. And somewhere in those 6 years, she stopped being the woman with the yellow nursery and became the woman at Booth 6's favorite waitress. And she told herself that was enough, because it had to be. She never once thought to ask Grant what he did for a living, because the honest truth was she'd stopped believing men like that. Calm, comfortable, unhurried men who tipped in cash and never checked their phone at the table existed for women like her. She assumed he was comfortable. Middle management, maybe. A man with enough money not to worry, but not so much it would ever occur to her to wonder further. She had exactly one rule left in her life after Daniel died, and it was this: don't get curious about men who are kind to you, because kindness runs out and curiosity just makes the running out hurt more. Grant broke that rule anyway, slowly, patiently, the way water breaks stone. He started staying past his coffee. He started remembering things, that Eli liked dinosaurs, that Josie's feet hurt worse on Thursdays because that was her longest shift, that she'd once mentioned, just once months ago, that she used to be good with numbers before her life became about survival instead of spreadsheets. He remembered everything she said like he was studying for a test only he knew was coming. One evening in early spring, 6 months after the fire, he stayed until closing, helping her stack chairs onto tables without being asked, moving through the diner like he already knew where everything went. "Can I ask you something?" Josie said, wiping down the counter. "And you have to actually answer this time instead of turning it into a joke. That depends entirely on the question. What do you do for work? You're here 3-4 times a week at 11 in the morning on a Tuesday. Most people have jobs." Something crossed his face then, quick, gone almost before she caught it. If she'd known him longer, she would have recognized it as the exact expression of a man standing at the edge of a decision he'd been circling for weeks. "I run a company," he said finally. "It's not very interesting. Try me. I used to be good with boring. Logistics, mostly. Shipping. Warehousing. The unglamorous stuff that makes the glamorous stuff show up on time." Josie felt something small and cold move through her chest, quick as a shiver, gone before she could name it. Logistics. It was such an ordinary word. Half the men in this county worked logistics in one form or another. She let it go, because the alternative was letting a ghost into a moment that had otherwise been good, and she was so tired of ghosts. "You ever think about going back," Grant asked, "to something like that? The numbers thing?" "Every single day," she said, and it surprised her how easily the truth came out, how long it had been sitting right under the surface waiting for someone to actually ask. But daycare costs more than I make some weeks, and nobody wants to hire a woman with a 6-year employment gap and no degree past community college. I applied to 40 places after Daniel died. I got 4 callbacks and 0 offers. Eventually, you stop applying and start surviving instead. Grant was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke again, his voice had changed, dropped into something lower and more careful. What if I told you I might know a place that's hiring? I tell you I've heard that before from men who wanted something else afterward. Not this, he said, and something in the way he said it made her believe him completely, made the cold thing in her chest melt for a second into something warmer and far more dangerous. Never this. She almost said yes that night. She almost let herself believe that the universe, which had taken everything from her in the space of 4 months 6 years earlier, might finally be handing something back. But something held her tongue, some old instinct built from too many disappointments, and she told him she'd think about it. And he nodded like he understood, like he had all the patience in the world, because the truth was he did. What Josie didn't know, what she wouldn't know for another 6 weeks, until the single worst and best day of her entire life collided into one impossible afternoon, was that the man sitting across from her, the man who'd run in a fire for her son and remembered how she took her coffee and asked careful questions about numbers she used to love, was Nathaniel Grant Whitfield, CEO and sole owner of Whitfield Logistics, the very same company that had mailed her a termination notice at 4:58 p.m. on a Friday afternoon while she was 6 weeks pregnant and burying her husband. He had known who she was since the second week. Not the fire. That had been chance, real chance, the kind no man can engineer no matter how much money he has. But 2 weeks after the fire, when he'd started coming back to that diner on purpose, his assistant had pulled her file out of curiosity, the way you look up an old classmate, and what came back had nearly stopped his heart. Josie Marie Hart, former accounts manager, Whitfield Logistics, Denver Division, terminated in a restructuring 6 weeks before her due date, 4 months after her husband Daniel Hart, a Whitfield company driver, died in a single-vehicle accident on Company Route 14 during an ice storm the safety department had been warned about 8 days earlier and done nothing to address. He had signed that restructuring order himself, not personally reviewed each name. There had been 200 of them, and he trusted his COO's recommendations the way CEOs of companies that size are forced to trust people beneath them. But his name was on the authorization. His signature was the last thing standing between Josie Hart keeping her insurance during the worst 4 months of her life and losing it. He had gone back to that diner every week after learning that, not because he wanted forgiveness, though God knew he wanted that too, but because he needed to look at what his company's decisions actually cost people, needed to sit across from the real human wreckage of a line item on a restructuring spreadsheet, and somewhere in the middle of needing that, he had fallen in love with her instead, completely and helplessly, in a way that made the guilt so much worse and so much harder to confess. He told himself he'd tell her eventually. He told himself every week that this was the week. And every week, watching her laugh at something small, watching her son draw dinosaurs on napkins at the counter, he told himself just one more week, just let this be good a little longer before it has to become complicated. That is the trap every good liar sets for himself. Just one more week. The offer came 2 weeks later, not for Grant directly, but through what looked like an ordinary job posting. Senior accounts analyst, Whitfield Logistics Regional Office, 40 minutes from her apartment. Josie almost didn't apply. She'd stopped believing in coincidences that convenient. But Grant encouraged her, gently, the way he encouraged everything, and Eli needed new shoes, and pride is a luxury single mothers can't always afford. So she sent in her resume with her hands shaking. She got the interview in 4 days. She got the offer in 7. $68,000 a year, full benefits, a signing bonus that made her cry alone in her car in the diner parking lot before her shift, because it was the first time in 6 years anyone had looked at her and seen a person with a future instead of a woman just barely holding a life together. She didn't know Grant owned the company. She didn't know the hiring manager had received a private, quiet instruction from the executive floor to review her application personally and fairly, not to favor her unfairly, just to actually look Actually consider a candidate whose resume might otherwise get lost in an algorithm that filtered out 6-year employment gaps without a second thought. She thought she'd earned it. She had earned it. That was the terrible, complicated truth sitting at the center of everything. She was good. She'd always been good. She just needed someone to open a door that should never have been closed to her in the first place. She told Grant the good news over coffee, glowing, alive in a way he hadn't seen in the year he'd known her. And he smiled and told her he was proud of her, and he meant it so completely that for one more week, he let himself believe the secret sitting in his chest might just quietly disappear if he loved her hard enough around it. It did not disappear. Secrets like that never do. They just wait for the worst possible moment to surface, and 3 months into her new job, on the same week Eli turned 8, on the same week Grant finally worked up the courage to ask her to dinner somewhere that wasn't a diner booth, the worst possible moment arrived wearing navy blue suit and carrying a leather folder. Josie was 2 months into loving her job in a way she hadn't loved anything since before Daniel died. She was good at it, better than good. Her supervisor kept telling her, already talking about a promotion, and for the first time in 6 years, she woke up excited instead of just determined. That Thursday, the whole regional office had been buzzing since morning about a corporate visit. The CEO himself, coming down from headquarters for a quarterly review, a man most of the regional staff had never actually seen in person because he ran things from 3 states away and mostly through video calls. Josie was in the third-floor conference room, finishing a report when the door opened, and the entire room stood up like they'd been electrocuted, and she looked up from her laptop to see Grant walk in wearing a suit she'd never seen him in, flanked by 2 assistants with tablets, being introduced by the regional director as Mr. Whitfield, our CEO. The coffee cup in her hand hit the floor before her brain had even finished processing what her eyes were showing her. Every sound in the room seemed to fold in on itself. She heard her supervisor say something about the Denver quarterly numbers. She heard Grant's voice, the same voice that had asked about Eli's dinosaurs, the same voice that had said which door and pulled her son out of smoke, now saying something crisp and professional about fourth-quarter shipping metrics to a room full of people who had no idea this man had eaten 2 eggs over easy across from her 3 days a week for the better part of a year. He saw her. Their eyes met across that conference room, and she watched the color drain out of his face in real time, watched him understand in that single frozen second exactly what she now understood too, that the man who ran in a fire for her son and the man who owned the company that fired her while she buried her husband and carried his unborn child were the same man, and he had known the entire time, and he had let her fall in love with him inside that silence. She didn't scream. She didn't cause a scene, because 6 years of surviving had taught her that scenes cost you things you can't afford to lose. She picked up her broken coffee cup with hands that would not stop shaking, said something to her supervisor about needing a minute, and walked out of that building and did not stop walking until she was 3 blocks away, sitting on a bus bench that wasn't even at her stop, crying a way she hadn't let herself cry since the week they buried Daniel. Grant found her there 40 minutes later. He'd left the review meeting mid-sentence, something no one in that company had ever seen him do, and he found her on that bench with mascara down her face and her whole body curled, small the way people get when they're trying to disappear into themselves. "Josie, don't." Her voice came out flat and cold, a voice she didn't recognize in herself. "Don't you dare say my name right now, like you have any right to it. Let me explain." "Explain what, Grant?" "Explain how you sat in that booth every week, and let me tell you about my dead husband and my newborn baby and losing my insurance, and you never once thought that was information worth sharing? Explain how you got me a job at your own company, and let me believe I earned something clean when really you were just, what? Easing your conscience. Buying yourself forgiveness 1 paycheck at a time. You did earn it. Josie, you earned every part of that job. I swear to you. You signed the paper." Her voice cracked wide open on that sentence, and something in his face broke along with it. "The restructuring. I read my termination letter 100 times that year. I could recite it in my sleep, and I remember the name at the bottom because I used to stare at it and wonder what kind of person signs 200 people's lives away in one afternoon and goes home to dinner like nothing happened. And it was you. The whole time it was you. I didn't know your name back then. I didn't review individual files. I trusted people I shouldn't have trusted, and by the time I found out who you were, it was already what? Already convenient to keep quiet, already easier to just keep having breakfast with me and pretending the last 6 years of my life didn't happen because of a decision you made. He had no answer for that, because there wasn't one, not really, not one that didn't sound like exactly what it was. A man who had let guilt curdle in a love, and then let that love become an excuse to stay silent. She stood up from that bench, and Josie Hart, who had buried a husband, raised a son alone, and rebuilt an entire life out of the wreckage of a Friday afternoon email, looked at him with the kind of exhaustion that goes deeper than any anger. "I need you to stay away from us," she said. "For me. From Eli. He asked about you, you know. He drew you a picture last week. The fireman version of you, except you're not a fireman. Are you? You're just a very rich man who's been playing dress-up in my life for a year. Josie, please. I have to go pick up my son," she said, and walked away. And for the first time since the fire, he did not follow her, because some part of him, the part that had learned this lesson from watching her walk out of that conference room, finally understood that some things cannot be chased. They can only be waited for and earned back, slow and true, the same way trust is ever earned by anyone. She quit the job 3 days later. Not because she wanted to, she loved that work, loved the person she was becoming inside it, but because every hallway in that building now felt like a room she'd been tricked into standing in, and her pride, the same pride that had carried her through 6 years of double shifts, would not let her collect a paycheck signed, even indirectly, by a man who'd let her fall in love with a version of the truth. Ruby took her back at the diner without a single question, just wrapped her in a hug that smelled like coffee grounds and bacon grease, and said, "Booth 6 is retired, honey. Nobody's sitting there again unless you tell me it's okay." For 6 weeks, nobody sat there. Grant did not come back to the diner. He did not call. He did not send flowers or cash or careful, guilty gifts, because he understood, finally, painfully, that Josie Hart had spent her whole life having decisions made about her future by men who never bothered to ask what she actually wanted, and the kindest thing he could give her now, the only true kindness left available to him, was distance and silence and the patience to let her choose, if she ever chose anything at all, entirely on her own terms. What he did instead was quieter, and it took much longer to reach her, and when it finally did, it changed everything. He went to his board and demanded a full audit of the restructuring that had taken place 6 years earlier. Every name, every severance package, every family affected by decisions made in a boardroom by people who never had to look those families in the eye. It cost the company money. It cost him the comfortable fiction that his success had never touched anyone unfairly. He personally reviewed all 200 files, reading each one the way he should have read Josie's the first time, and what he found kept him up most nights for a month. Families who'd lost health coverage during medical crises, workers let go 2 weeks before pension vesting dates, corners cut by people optimizing for quarterly numbers instead of human lives. He didn't do it to win Josie back. He told himself that every single night, because if he did it for her, it would just be one more version of the same lie, using her pain as the reason he finally became a better man, instead of becoming a better man because it was simply, finally, the right thing to do. He set up a fund. He reached out, quietly, without press releases, to as many of those 200 families as could still be found, offering what could actually help, reinstated benefits where it mattered, financial support for the ones hit hardest, an apology that cost him more pride than any dollar amount could measure. Josie heard about it the way small towns hear about everything, sideways, through Ruby, who'd heard it from a cousin whose neighbor had worked in the Denver office and gotten a call out of nowhere about back-owed benefits from an accident 4 years prior. She sat with that information for 3 days before she let herself feel anything about it at all. And then, on a Tuesday morning in early autumn, 9 weeks after the conference room, Eli came running into the diner ahead of her, breathless, holding a piece of paper. Mom, look, it's in the mail pile, it's for you." It was a letter, handwritten, not typed, in handwriting she recognized instantly, because she'd watched that hand write out orders on diner receipts for a year, careful and slightly slanted. It didn't ask for forgiveness. It didn't ask for anything at all. It simply said that he understood if she never wanted to see him again, that everything he'd done in the 2 months since the conference room he'd done because it was right and not because he expected it to earn anything back, and that booth 6 would remain empty for as long as she needed it to be, whether that was forever or not. At the bottom, in smaller handwriting, like an afterthought he almost hadn't allowed himself to write, it said, "Eli's dinosaur drawing is on my desk. It's the only thing in my office that ever tells the truth about who I actually want to be." Josie read that letter 4 times, standing at the counter with her coat still on, and Ruby watched her from across the room and said nothing, because some moments don't need commentary, they just need space to happen. She didn't run back to him that day. This isn't that kind of story, and she wasn't that kind of woman. Not anymore, not after everything the last 6 years had carved into her. But she folded the letter and put it in her apron pocket, and she thought about it through her entire shift, through every plate of eggs and every refilled coffee. And that night, after Eli was asleep, she sat at her small kitchen table and wrote back. She didn't say it was okay. She didn't say she forgave him, because forgiveness, she'd learned from 6 years of grief, wasn't a door that opened all at once. It was a hallway you walked down slowly, one honest step at a time. What she wrote was simpler than that. She wrote that Eli missed him. She wrote that she was still angry, and probably would be for a while, and that anger and missing someone could apparently live in the same chest without canceling each other out, which is a thing she hadn't known before this year. And she wrote that booth 6 could stop being empty on Thursday at 11 if he still remembered how she liked her coffee. He remembered. He was there Thursday at 10:40, sitting in the booth like a man who'd been rehearsing this exact moment for 9 weeks, which he had, and when Josie walked out from the back and saw him there, gray jacket, same careful eyes, same patience that had once run in a fire, and now had learned the much harder patience of simply waiting to be let back in. She didn't smile right away. She walked over slowly, order pad in hand, the way she would for any customer, and she said, "Black coffee, 2 eggs over easy. Wheat toast?" You remembered. "You're not that complicated, Grant." "No," he said, and something in his voice cracked open, soft and real. "I guess I'm not. Not anymore." She poured his coffee herself instead of sending it with a busser, and their hands brushed against the cup the way they had 100 times before the world got complicated, and for one quiet second, standing in a diner with scorch marks still faintly visible on the ceiling, if you knew exactly where to look, it felt almost like nothing had ever gone wrong at all. It took another 8 months before Josie let herself say the word love out loud again. And when she finally did, it wasn't in some grand cinematic moment. It was on an ordinary Tuesday, watching Grant teach Eli how to tie a fishing line at the edge of a lake, patient in a way that had nothing to do with money and everything to do with a man who had learned, the hard way, exactly what it cost to earn something real instead of simply being handed it. She married him 14 months after that letter, in a small ceremony at Ruby's diner after hours, string lights instead of chandeliers, booth 6 pushed against the wall to make room for folding chairs, and Eli standing beside Grant instead of anyone else, because somewhere in those 14 months, without either of them quite noticing the exact day it happened, the boy had stopped drawing him as a fireman and started drawing him simply, plainly as Dad. And if you ever find yourself driving down Route 9, past a small diner with a corner booth by the window, you'll see that there's still a reserved sign nobody ever bothers to move, because some tables, once they've held that much truth, earn the right to stay exactly as they are. If this story hit you the way it hit me writing it, you already know what to do. Subscribe so you don't miss the next one, and tell me in the comments which moment wrecked you the most, because I read every single one.